Welcome to Just Relationships, the show that offers you concrete ways to make your relationships better. Whether it's your boss, your spouse, your children, or your friends, the quality of your relationships in life directly affects how you feel about yourself and the success you achieve. Your host, Dr. Duffy Spencer, a psychotherapist, telecoach, author, and seminar leader, will interview top experts to help you learn to manage this essential part of your life. And now, here's your host, Dr. Duffy Spencer.
What do you imagine would have happened if Anne Frank would have escaped successfully and not hide in the attic? Well, I read the diary of Anne Frank as a teenager. Well, I am very, very pleased to have as my guest Sylvie Heyman, who did escape from Hitler. And it obviously affected her entire life. And she wrote a book called Beyond the Holocaust, an immigrant's search for identity. Welcome, Sylvie Heyman. Welcome, my dear.
Thank you so much for having me, Duffy. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. And I want everyone to know that Sylvie, I am proud to say, is my friend. And when I learned about her book, when she told me, I was so thrilled. And I know you have referenced Anne Frank throughout your life, kind of a point counterpoint. And you're the one that got away, my dear, and you lived to tell the tale. So can you just tell people a little bit about your history?
Well, do you want my history or how I came around to expressing myself about Anne Frank? Because my history is really that we were bombarded in Belgium when I was about 2 years old. And yes, we were lucky. We were a big family. And we were just able to get ourselves out through Belgium, through France, and got out of Europe in 1940. Which I have been told by many, many historians that was really the last chance for Jews to get out of Europe. And how blessed was I that my family did. How blessed.
What a tale. I'm gathering you don't remember that at 2, actually leaving Belgium.
I don't. My mom, though, throughout my life told me little bits and, bats about our voyage whenever she felt inclined or whenever she needed to talk about it. And so sometimes I feel that I do remember it, but in all consciousness, I say to myself, I was 2. I don't know if it's my memory or my mom's. So when I wrote the book, I'm a pretty honest person. I never want to say or do something that is not the truth. So not knowing for sure whether those, although, I've had noises in my head about bombs and so forth, but I cannot say that I remember every piece of that journey. So I made that my mother's voice.
Yes, you did. Yes. I love how you did that. What you didn't, sorry. Yes. What you didn't remember, you had your mother tell the story in the book. And I like how you did that when you didn't know yourself personally, how you filled in with research, with other things. So basically, your family was so proactive that to get out of Belgium to France. And then what happened? Just give us a little bit of the epilogue.
Well, mother had to go to the embassy and get a visa, and that was very treacherous and very, very difficult. But we did finally have a visa to leave, and that we actually all eventually met in Portugal. This was to be like a 6-month journey, but we all did meet in Portugal and left at different times. My parents and I could not come to the United States because my father was German and there was an issue with quota for Germans. He was the only one in my family who was German. Everybody else was Belgian and everybody else was able to get straight to the United States with their visas. So we could not. So our we departed towards Brazil. That was the best chance, anything to get out of Europe. And we spent 4 years there, and then we went to Argentina.
My goodness. Yes. And you spent a good amount of time in Buenos Aires, correct? Were you, or somewhere else in Argentina?
No, it was always in Buenos Aires. And, the interesting thing, Duffy, is that I have only spent 8 years. That was a 6 to 14, 8 years in the country. And I'm here, 60, 70 years. And yet those 8 years were my very formative years. I had never gone to school before. So they were very formative years. And they stuck in my mind more than anything I could have possibly imagined. And I still have an opinion.
Yeah. Yes, you love the Argentinian food and the culture and so much. So you came to the United States as a teenager.
14.
At 14 years old, finally, you got to the U.S. Mm-hmm. So can you just tell us, we're going to look at your quest for identity, how hard it was for you, first of all, as a 14-year-old, being a teenager. And teenagers have such a hard time with their identity, and being in an entirely new country and feeling different and all of that. Yeah, I would like to hear that, and that's why we're doing part 2. And I would like to know a little bit more about what it was like for you being Jewish in Europe. You also distinguish between being an immigrant and being a refugee. Mm-hmm. Can you share that with us?
Absolutely. And thank you for bringing that up, because that is very important to me. Because I think that most people in my shoes would have not even bat an eyelash to say that they were refugees of the Holocaust. And the way I felt is that we had not landed in a concentration camp. We were not in a detention camp. We were not hidden in an attic like ants. Right. We were not in the underground pipes, which you've heard stories about that. We did not have a clear sailing, but we had the opportunity to get out before all those atrocities. And I could not possibly align myself with people who have suffered those atrocities and put myself in the same category. So I always felt that I was a refugee of World War II.
Yes.
The Holocaust is something else, that's part of World War II, but it puts you into another sphere of what that really means. So I personally could not feel that way. They suffered way much more than I did, at least through the war.
Yes.
We all have our own personal issues and sequela from such a traumatic event, such as the war. But everybody digests it, or, everybody has a different way of expressing it or even internalizing it. But as far as being a refugee, I feel completely fine claiming that I am a refugee of World War II. But right. I surrounded by the threat of the Holocaust. And to me, the Holocaust meant, not necessarily death, because a lot of people got out, but it meant a whole lot of suffering that we were spared by the good Lord. We were spared.
Wow. What was it like being Jewish in Belgium, France, Portugal, Brazil, Argentina, and then, of course, the U.S.? What was your relationship between being Jewish and the Holocaust, even though I like how you put that you were surrounded by threats of the Holocaust. So what was that experience like, Sylvie?
Fear, insecurity, but tremendous fear, but courage. And courage, of course, it came from my parents. I was just a little girl at the time, but tremendous amount of perseverance and hope and trust and faith that we will get out of this. Well, as far as how did I feel about being Jewish, I can only address that in terms of Argentina. I mean, I'm 6 years old now. I finally start school. I'm sort of, we're in Brazil. We did not have a very big profile. We didn't go to too many places. I didn't go to school. Why? Because the government really, they accepted us, but they really didn't want Jews. So we didn't want to make waves. And we were still scared because, the war was still going on. It didn't stop until 1945. So we were scared that we would be caught and as Jews in Brazil, and we would be sent back to Europe. So that's why we kept a very low profile. How does it like to be a Jew in Argentina at that time? That was not pleasant because, overtly speaking, there was no persecution, overtly speaking. But I don't know, to tell you the truth, Duffy, I don't know if my father was extra careful about it or afraid or paranoid about it. I'm not sure, but all I know is that I was given instructions, make sure that nobody knows you're Jewish and don't wear your star, your Star of David, and just if people ask you, just don't say anything, so this kind of prep. So it was not comfortable to be a Jew in Argentina at that time.
And you talked about Perón. Right, Perón gave the impression that he felt favorable toward Jewish people and even wanted to help. But over time, he changed his tune.
Oh, it was never there to begin with. It was just a tune. Why? Because we entered Argentina just as the war ended. Now, remember and recall that a lot of Nazis landed in Argentina, many Nazis. So, and he opened the doors to them. He knew. So that was all political lies. He just was trying to say, well, what is the political thing to do here? The war ended. The Jews are coming out even of concentration camps. Hey, to say something negative about Jewish people at that time would not have been in his favor as a president. So I think he was just being, a politician.
Wow. Did you have any sense of, there are Nazis around and it's scary, or?
Always, I don't know whether that was something that, who instilled that fear in me. I do think that a lot of it had to do with my own family, my father. But yes, I would come out of the house with big eyes and I would be very careful. And I just always felt that there was someone that was going to grab me by the back of my clothes. As a little girl, you grab a little girl sometimes by her clothing and bring her up like that and say, you're going back. And I had those kinds of fears.
Wow. To live that way, to be so traumatized, Sylvie. You really were traumatized.
Yeah, but compared to those who ended up in camps, everything is relative. So I could not make too much of my own trauma when I was spared from the very, very ultimate horrors.
Yeah, that's interesting how you put it, Sylvie, because you were traumatized. But you can say, of course, there's a continuum of trauma, and that, but that doesn't mean that you were not traumatized, and that you didn't suffer from post-traumatic stress.
You're absolutely right, Duffy. And I think what I tried to do all my life is just simply deny that I was any part of that. But it was beyond denial because I would have bad dreams. I would have fears of being sometimes with people, not trusting them. So I had a lot, but I just did not accept that as a trauma at the time because I was too fearful that it could have been worse.
Right. Well, I think that is a very important perspective. Your awareness that it could have been worse. That I think that was very, very helpful. and that you felt, as you say, blessed and lucky. That and reading about your family, they were very unusual people. They were very intelligent. They were very proactive and brave to do all these things. Many, as we know, many Jewish people couldn't believe what could happen. It was so far out of their thinking that anybody could behave that way that they decided to trust and hope for the best.
Exactly.
But somehow your family, your father, he and your maman, how you pronounce mama? You call her
mommy.
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 Mommy and Papi.
Mommy and Papi.
Mm-hmm.
That they knew what could be. They could be the worst. That could be the worst. And your father, that old joke about paranoia. Sometimes paranoid people are correct. So he was cautious, understandably, very, very cautious. So what is it like to say that, yeah, I was blessed, I was lucky, that it sounds like that really, really helped you?
Well, I do say that I'm blessed, but I also realized much later that I had a lot of guilt.
Yes.
And that guilt was not one that I could talk to anybody about. So it was sort of pushed in there, and it did not manifest until a little bit later in my life, but I was riddled with guilt. And when I did read Anne Frank's story and knew about it, that's really when I realized, my goodness, the guilt really manifested itself there by the grace of God.
Yeah, go ahead.
I had PTSD. I had a lot of habits that were, my parents really couldn't keep a complete eye on me because they had so much to worry about and think about in terms of talking to other people about the war. I don't think that they paid a whole lot of attention, but I'm very thankful that they brought me along and that they didn't in some transport, in some kinder transport, landing somewhere with our parents, with our children in England, as a lot of parents did. But I did have a lot of nightmares and PTSD, and I did a lot of things, explained in my book. It was difficult to put that in the book, that I never really admitted to anyone ever. Some of the things that I did to myself, in order to feel less emotional pain, I think what I wanted to do is bring on some more physical pain, which would distract me as a child, away from feeling the pain of fear and lonesomeness and guilt and everything that was going on. Yes.
And we know now how common, unfortunately, that is, the self-mutilation, self-harm, as you say, that, believe it or not, the physical pain is less painful than the emotional pain. Mm-hmm. And like nail biting and picking the skin around your nails, and it was raw, and you were ashamed to show, and you didn't know at the time what you were doing.
No, I wasn't really sure why I was doing those kinds of acts against myself. I wasn't really sure, but it was more than picking fingers. I can tell you that. It was really, massacring your hands and feet.
Yes.
Today, I still have remnants of it. Okay, so I always look at my hands and I check them out, and but there's always one little thing that gets it. And lately, it's been my left thumb. Everything else is fine, but my left thumb, I still kind of like, because it almost became a habit.
Yes, it became a bad habit.
to deal with tension that way. So as soon as I have a little tension, boom, 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 I'm picking.
Yes, and I want everyone to know that this is Dr. Duffy Spencer. We are WHPC, and I am interviewing Sylvie Heyman, who is the author of the book Beyond the Holocaust, an immigrant's search for identity. And in the future, I'm going to be interviewing you on how one creates good habits, coming from bad habits and being aware how habitual these activities were. And that's the nature of all compulsions and addictions, dealing with tension. Somehow it releases the body. These activities, whatever they are, whether it's drinking or drugging or shopping, there are things called process addictions, rather than only substance addictions. And they're all about releasing tension and pain and emotional pain, the tension that comes from the thoughts, the beliefs, the memories, all of that. Mm-hmm. So you did that. And again, I want everyone to know that in the next month or two, I don't have the exact date, I'll let you know that that Sylvie and I are going to be doing 2 more shows, another 2-part series on her other book, which is, what's the name of your other book?
Make It a Habit.
Make It a Habit. I love that. That's a great title. I'll make a habit of that. and William Glasser wrote about positive addictions and, creating, he called it positive addictions, but you as a healthcare practitioner wrote this book, which you actually wrote before Beyond the Holocaust. Beyond the Holocaust is your more recent book, but I wanted to interview you first on this book because that's the story of your life. And that's what caused you to be so expert at creating good habits. The fact that you were massacrated, is that the right word? You massacrated your hands and feet? Is that the term?
Let me see now. I don't think massacrated is, it'll come to me.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what the word is. It was destructive. It was destructive, picking at your hands and feet to the point that they bled and were raw and painful. My goodness. So around what time did you develop that? And that came from survivor guilt, which you couldn't talk about. Yes. Interesting. It wasn't common or the thing to do to talk about the war shortly after the war had ended. So we're talking 1945, and then I came to this country in 1952. And it really still, people didn't talk about the war. Even people coming out of concentration camps, they didn't want to remember. They didn't want to talk about it. And that was the way, the status quo of refugees at that time. I think that the story of Anne Frank did a lot to bring it out into the world for the world to see and hear from people who were victims. And so shortly after I came to this country is when that book came out. And that book did not come out so quickly. Her father, who we know is responsible for making sure that the world knows about the story, when he first compiled everything that she had written and sent it to publications and nobody in Europe wanted to have anything to do with that book, believe it or not. It was not accepted. I'm not exactly sure, but finally, after a lot of refusals and rejections, I should say, it was picked up by an American publicist, or not publicist, but
publisher, yes.
Publisher.
Yeah.
And that's when the world started to hear a little bit more from a little girl. And then there were films about it. There was a theater about her. And so she became an icon for this period of time. And that's when people started to open up a bit more and people started to talk about it. But not something you think about.
And we have to close this show. That's why I wanted to interview you for 2 shows, because that is the exact opposite of how people are supposed to handle trauma. They are supposed to talk about it. Mm-hmm. They are supposed to share. They are supposed to cry. They are supposed to vent. They are supposed to be heard. All of that. And I had open heart surgery a few months ago, and I was very traumatized. I had terrible complications, almost to fatality. And I knew, and I'm fine now, but because I knew I had to talk about it and keep talking about it and cry whenever I felt like it at the drop of a hat. Mm-hmm. And I would do that because I knew. But imagine people at that time in 1945, that it was not okay to talk about the war, their whole life experience, all of that, and they couldn't talk about it. They were supposed to bury it. Was there shame involved? And we'll talk about it next week. You'll tell me more, but quickly, was there shame? Is that why they didn't talk about it?
That's a very, very good question. And I don't think I ever entertained the possibility that it was based on shame. I think it was based on, I don't ever want to remember any part of it. I don't want to have it in my conscious mind now.
Right.
If you're going to talk about it, it stays in your conscious mind. So I think it was not a denial. I don't think it was so much shame either, but I'm not
right.
sure. But definitely.
Yeah, but that makes a lot of sense too. I want to look forward and be in present time and not look back. I get that. Mm-hmm. Well, Sylvie Heyman, author of Beyond the Holocaust, An Immigrant's Search for Identity, which we're going to be talking about next week. Mm-hmm. And you can get your book anywhere?
Well, it's mostly available at Amazon.com for sure. Yeah. It's also in online and Barnes & Noble. And the book can also be obtained from Balboa Press, directly from the publisher, Balboa Press.
Well, I read it like a novel, Sylvie. And I'm so looking forward to talking to you again next week. And thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us. And everyone stay tuned into next week to hear part 2 of Beyond the Holocaust by Sylvie Heyman. And this is Dr. Duffy Spencer saying goodbye for now and wishing you great relationships.